Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Work Punks, in which we, as always, answer your work related questions. We have expertise around the virtual table from Ben Simpson of VitalOrg, Colin Newlyn of Decrapify Work, and myself, Paul Jansen of Trustworks. Today's question, I think, landed on your desk, didn't it, Ben?
Indeed. Yeah, thank you, Paul. It goes something like this. How do you create an open, high-performing culture and avoid candor turning into bullying? But I think if we kind of deconstruct this into kind of first principles, you know, if the aim is high performance, then all the science tells us as human beings and as individual human beings and in groups, we are only able to do our best work when we are feeling good about ourselves, when we are able to bring a high level of self-esteem, where we are motivated by purpose, where we have adequate resources, and a little bit of challenge to make it to make it spicy. So I would suggest that um, Candour is a major contributor to creating those conditions. Um, but Candour alone isn't going to get us there. If we just, as leaders, if we through our own behaviour create the a set of permissions around you can say anything you want to anyone, we are likely to end up with some bullying. So I think, it's more, we need to be more sensitive to context, and I think we need to be more appreciative of the wider range of possibilities of human behavior, which, as we've said on previous episodes, is massively wide ranging. So I think, yeah, it Candour's great, but only if you create the conditions where that's going to be positive for people. It is still continues to surprise me that there is so little provision to help us raise our game in terms of our conscious behavioral skill, in terms of how we think, how we speak, how we listen. So I think if you want to go down this route, then equip those people with those skills whereby they can engage in conversation with real, brutal candor, but in such a way that it's met well and results in a positive, generative conversation. So, yeah, all for it. Feedback, feed forward, being comfortable soliciting, giving, and receiving feedback are for us a really, really strong marker. The maturity of that for us a really, really strong marker of organizational effectiveness. But that's where you start. Start by giving people the skills, by defining the boundaries, by being an exemplar in your position as a leader of really, really great behaviors, rather than just taking the training wheels off and pushing the kids one by one down the slope.
There's a lot of subtext to this question, isn't there? Um, I mean,
Very so.
to take the first part of it, a you have high performing teams. I don't think you have a high performing culture. You can have a culture that encourages high performing teams. That's a different thing. Um, and in a high performing team, there is openness and honesty and candor because it's high levels of trust and respect. Um, And where you get into trouble is if you say to people, we're going to be honest and open with each other and say what we think, and you don't put in place the trust and respect. Um, and I mean, this sort of alludes to that book, Radical Candor, which I haven't read it because I thought I probably would get very annoyed if I did. But what I know of it, um, it um, it seems to completely ignore the power dynamic that's in any relationship.
Hmm.
So it's one thing to be, open and honest with your peer. It's quite different if your superior or someone who has more power than you is being open and honest to you. And that can be received, and is actually, to my mind, bullying if the person doing it is unaware of it. So yeah, so I think that's a danger. And to some degree, the level of candor and the way that those honest conversations take place, it is sort of decided by the team. That's part of the building of trust and respect. You define your own boundaries, and people will, police each other. So if somebody goes in hard on somebody else, others will push back and say, "Hang on a minute, you've gone too far there, or that's not fair." Or we don't say things like that to each other. That's the sort of conversation that you need.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I mean, I've been in teams like that. They're absolutely fantastic to be in, but they don't come about easily. They certainly don't come about because someone gives out copies of Radical Candour and says we're going to have a high performance culture. Should that be what was being thought of?
Yeah, so what you're describing really is a team where there's a lot of psychological safety, right? You feel safe um, to challenge each other, but also to come up with ideas, to suggest things that perhaps might be absolutely bonkers and completely way off, but that's okay because you're not going to be taken the mickey out of. You feel safe to ask questions that might be perhaps stupid, and that's because those high levels of trust are there, that you're all there in it together and you're working towards the same purpose. But I liked what you raised about the power dynamics. I think there is definitely that risk of if candor is one way, then and especially if it's from top to or higher power to less power, which generally is from senior level to more junior level, then clearly that's a recipe for disaster. That can go wrong very, very quickly. There's also the reverse, though, isn't there? And I see that sometimes where it's actually the more senior person who feels that the junior would benefit from feedback, but the junior member of staff sees it as or reports it as bullying. So clearly there is no trust between the two individuals or between the two categories of workers, where actually delivering feedback perhaps on the job because it's an urgent kind of environment where this is not the time for pleases and thank yous. This is the time for, okay, you got to do it this way. Otherwise, I don't know, the patient dies or the car crashes or, the plane will drop out of the sky. That's when feedback and instructions need to be clear, quick, and timely, and not open to multiple interpretation. And there are organizations where there is not the mutual trust and respect, and teamliness, as we often call it at TrustWorks, the team spirit and the team trust that allows you to do that without feeling that there's anything more going on than just trying to do the best possible job for that particular context. So the power dynamics in that sense could also be reversed, and increasingly I pick up stories and complaints and lamenting from fairly senior people who say, "Look, I can't give feedback anymore to my junior members of staff because they complain at the drop of a hat." So there is that power dynamic as well, which I think is interesting. So for me, what I think is lacking in a lot of these organizations is that they don't create that language and that mutual respect. They don't practice it. They don't say, "Okay, people, let's role play for all I care," or however you train that, and let's agree what kind of conversation we might be having with each other, and how we're going to conduct them. And let's agree that that's okay, even if they're sometimes a bit, blunt and to the point. I quite like so Netflix is a bit extreme in their feedback culture, right? So they might give you might be doing a presentation for someone or for a big room full of people, and you might step down from the stage, and somebody might come up to you and says, "Ah, great presentation, Paul, but if I were you, I would have done slide 20 to 27. I would have dropped in the bin because it didn't really add anything." If you hear that for the first time, smack bang in your face right there, and then you're probably a little bit surprised. But that's the Netflix culture. But they have trained everybody on how they deliver feedback and also how you're supposed to respond to it. And I quite like that. It may not always work, and there's certainly also intercultural challenges for that. But it's
That's
just an
because you're
example of.
Dutch.
Come again?
That's because you're Dutch. That's right. I mean, just to pick
Mm,
up on your point about, boss saying I can't give my staff feedback,
Mm.
I would suggest that's because he hasn't established the right level of trust and respect.
mm.
So they don't trust him, they don't respect him, and they probably think he doesn't really care about me. It's just throwing his weight around. Candor can be used as an excuse for people to behave in bad ways that that they feel good about, but doesn't make anybody else feel very good.
Well, maybe that could be. It's not always about boss versus employee, of course. It's also, yeah, of course, you have more seniority and more juniority. Is that a word? People who've
It's
been on the
now.
job, people who've been on the job for 10 years and have more experience and more responsibility than you. Um, but perhaps you have been brought up more with, well, I'm a um, I've got a right to feel safe. By the way, there's another topic that we can explore in another one of our episodes. And safe being translated as not being told difficult things that I have to feel uncomfortable about. Um, it's okay to feel uncomfortable from time to time and sometimes be told that what you did was wrong and it's better to do it differently. Um, because that's learning. You should be open to learning. And that I think is lost in translation a little bit with certain individuals and organizations because they are so panicky about internal. Well, they're
Yeah.
panicky about bullying. They're panicky about
Mm.
um, uh, complaints and all sorts of things that the HR processes and procedures dominate how they respond to it, rather than thinking about how does this actually affect the ultimate performance towards what it is that we're trying to do here for a client or the patient or whatever the product or service is that we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, the bottom line here, I think, is you know, if you're on the receiving end of some feedback, you know yourself what that person's intent is. It comes in there, the language that they choose to use, the energy that they're bringing, the environment that they choose to give that feedback in. Some of the more sort of learnt behaviors around, just pre-scripting it with, I noticed one or two things there in your presentation. Would you be interested in my thoughts?
Mm.
You know, just small little things that can make a massive difference. And I think you're absolutely right, Paul. I think there is a real sense of fear around saying the wrong thing and then having a grievance put against me as a as a leader or manager. And I think very often that our innate response to that is probably to walk on eggshells a bit. And when we're doing that, we're not feeling good. So we're probably being even more clumsy with our language. And my experience is actually people find it quite refreshing. If you say, so it's a bit of a cliche, but it works. There is an expression that I'm hearing around more in more and more organizations these days that clear is kind.
Mm.
So if you're just being really, really clear and you know you're able to project by the language that you use and the energy that you'll bring, that your intent is that you're going to actually, your intent is to help this individual. Your intent is to help them raise their game. Your intent is to enable them to do an even better job next time.
I think that that is a great piece of advice to our question submitter. So hopefully that is of help. Thank you for listening and or watching our episode today. And we'll say goodbye to you now and hope to see you next time. Bye.
See you next time.
Bye.